There is something happening right now in the gold market that most financial analysts are completely ignoring, and I don't say that lightly. I've spent years watching these markets, studying the patterns, tracking what the smart money is doing behind closed doors, and what I'm seeing right now sends a very specific chill down my spine. Because the last time these exact conditions were in place, the last time the signals lined up this precisely, the United States government did something so shocking, so brazen, so constitutionally questionable that most people today don't even believe it's true when they first hear about it. They confiscated the gold. Not metaphorically, not through inflation, literally. The United States government made it a criminal offense for ordinary Americans to own gold, and they forced citizens to hand it over at a price the government set, not a price the market determined. Then, almost immediately after they collected it all, they revalued that same gold at a dramatically higher price. The citizens got the low price. The government kept the difference. And anyone who refused faced up to 10 years in prison and a fine equivalent to several years of average wages. That was 1933. And before you dismiss this as ancient history, before you tell yourself that could never happen again, I want to walk you through exactly what is happening in the gold market right now, layer by layer, and let you decide for yourself whether this particular piece of history might be getting ready to rhyme. Because here is what's true. Gold has just come off one of the most explosive bull runs in modern history. The metal has surged to all-time highs, leaving every skeptic, every gold is a relic commentator, and every mainstream financial pundit absolutely flat-footed. The move has been staggering. And yet, despite that enormous run, I'm not here to tell you the party is over. I'm here to tell you that the forces driving this price are not going away. They are accelerating. And one of those forces, the darkest one, the one nobody wants to talk about, rhymes perfectly with what happened in 1933. So let me take you back. Let me tell you the full story, because the history lesson alone should shake something loose in you. It's April of 1933. America is in the depths of the Great Depression. Banks have been collapsing for years. Unemployment is catastrophic. People are frightened, and that fear has a very rational expression. They are hoarding gold. They're pulling their savings out of the banking system in the form of coins and bullion because they don't trust paper money, and they don't trust the banks. And here's the problem for the government. All of that hoarded gold was outside the system. It wasn't being used. It wasn't inflating the money supply. And the Roosevelt administration desperately needed to inflate the money supply to pull the country out of depression. So on April 5th of that year, Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. And what that order said, in plain language, was this: every American citizen must surrender their gold, their coins, their bullion, their gold certificates, to the Federal Reserve by May 1st. You will be paid $20.67 per troy ounce. That is not a negotiation. That is not an offer. That is the law. And if you don't comply, if you're caught hoarding gold after that deadline, you face a fine of $10,000, which in today's money would be well over $200,000, and up to 10 years in federal prison. Let that sink in. Owning gold was a federal crime in America, within living memory of people who are still alive today. Now, here is where it gets truly sinister. Within about 9 months of forcing Americans to hand over their gold at just under $21 an ounce, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, and that act revalued gold to $35 per ounce, overnight. The government had just purchased the nation's gold at $20.67 and then immediately marked it up to $35. That is a gain of roughly 69%, and the citizens who were forced to sell at gunpoint got none of it. The Treasury Department pocketed the difference. Billions of dollars transferred from the American people to the federal government in a single legislative stroke. And this arrangement stayed in place. Americans were not legally permitted to own gold in meaningful quantities for over 40 years. It wasn't until Gerald Ford signed legislation in 1975 that ordinary Americans could once again legally accumulate gold bullion and coins without fear of prosecution. 42 years. Nearly half a century where the government controlled your access to the one asset that historically protects against exactly the kind of monetary debasement the government was engaged in. Now, I want you to hold that story in your mind as I walk you through what is happening today, because the parallels are not vague, they are not loose, they are specific, and they are alarming. Let's start with the debt. In 1933, the United States was grappling with a debt crisis born from the aftermath of World War I and the economic catastrophe of the Depression. The government needed a financial solution, a way to restructure the monetary system and create breathing room. The gold confiscation was that solution. It gave the government a massive balance sheet asset, allowed them to break the gold standard's constraints on money printing, and reset the economic clock. Fast forward to today. The United States is carrying a national debt that has grown to numbers so large they've become almost meaningless to the human brain. The interest payments alone on that debt have become one of the single largest line items in the entire federal budget, competing with defense spending, competing with Social Security. The government is paying more to service its debt than it spends on almost anything else. And that problem is not getting better. It is getting dramatically worse with every passing quarter. And here's where the 1933 parallel starts to get very sharp. When a government is drowning in debt and the traditional tools of monetary policy are exhausted, when interest rates can't go high enough to attract buyers for government bonds without cratering the economy, and can't go low enough to stimulate growth without triggering dangerous inflation, when you're caught in that trap, you start looking for unconventional solutions. You start looking for a way to reset the board. And the most powerful reset mechanism in all of monetary history has always been gold. Now, before we go any deeper into this, and I promise you we are going to go much deeper, I want to take just a moment to point you towards something valuable. I put together a free guide specifically for people who are watching videos like this one and wondering what they should actually be doing with their retirement savings right now. It covers the saving strategies that thousands of American retirees are using to protect their hard-earned wealth from exactly the kind of monetary risks we're talking about today. The guide is in the description below, completely free, worth taking a look at. Now, let's get back to what's actually happening in the gold market, because this is where it gets truly fascinating. Central banks around the world are buying gold at a pace that is, and I don't use this word lightly, historic. In the first quarter of this year alone, central bank gold purchases reached a record that dwarfed anything seen in recent history. We are talking about nation-states, sovereign governments, moving capital out of US dollar reserves and into physical gold at an absolutely breathtaking pace. The People's Bank of China, the Reserve Bank of India, central banks across the Middle East, across Eastern Europe, across Southeast Asia, they are all doing the same thing at the same time. And here is the question you have to ask yourself. These are not unsophisticated actors. These are institutions with armies of economists, geopolitical analysts, and monetary historians at their disposal. So what do they know that the average American retiree does not? What are they seeing in the global monetary architecture that is driving this desperate, urgent, record-setting accumulation of physical gold? The answer, I believe, lies in something called de-dollarization, and this concept is critical to understanding the 1933 parallel. When Roosevelt confiscated gold in 1933, it served a dual purpose. First, it gave the government a giant new asset on its balance sheet. Second, it completed the transition away from the old gold standard constraint. It freed the government to print money more aggressively to fight the Depression. But there was a hidden third consequence that wouldn't become fully visible for another decade. It set the stage for the dollar to become the world's reserve currency. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, with the United States holding the lion's share of the world's monetary gold, the dollar was crowned the king of global currencies. Everything priced in dollars, every nation holding dollars, every trade settled in dollars. That arrangement gave the United States what French President Charles de Gaulle famously called an exorbitant privilege, the ability to run deficits endlessly because the world would always need to hold dollars to participate in global commerce. Now that privilege is being challenged, and the challengers are not small. BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a growing coalition of others, have been publicly, loudly, and increasingly urgently working to create alternatives to the dollar-denominated global financial system. They are settling bilateral trade in local currencies. They are building alternative payment systems. They are diversifying their reserve holdings away from U.S. Treasury bonds. And they are buying gold, mountains of gold. Because here's what every serious monetary historian understands. When the next global reserve currency arrangement is negotiated, and arrangements do get renegotiated, this has happened multiple times in human history, The nations with the most gold will have the most leverage. The nation with the largest gold hoard gets to write the rules. And the United States, despite holding the official largest gold reserve in the world at Fort Knox and other depositories, has not had a full, independent audit of its gold in decades. The last comprehensive audit happened in the 1950s. We are taking it on faith that the gold is there. And in a world where faith in institutions is eroding at a remarkable pace, that is a very uncomfortable position to be in. This brings us to the market mechanics of what is actually happening at the COMEX right now, the primary exchange where gold prices are set, and why the story it tells is deeply reminiscent of a system under stress. Here is something that most people do not know about how gold is actually priced. The price you see quoted every day, the spot price, the number that scrolls across the ticker, is not primarily determined by people buying and selling physical gold bars. It is determined by a market in paper contracts, futures contracts, where traders speculate on the future price of gold without any intention of ever taking delivery of actual metal. Fewer than 5% of COMEX gold contracts ever result in physical delivery. The price is being set by paper, by promises, by a mechanism that operates largely in a parallel universe from the actual physical metal. And for decades, that system worked fine. The paper price and the physical price tracked each other closely enough that the gap was irrelevant to most investors. But something has been changing. Physical gold has been moving out of COMEX vaults consistently. Month after month, the registered inventory, the gold that's actually available for delivery, has been declining. People are taking the metal. And as the physical supply at COMEX tightens, the tension between the paper market price and the true physical supply-demand reality intensifies. This is not a new phenomenon. We've seen moments in history where paper claims on gold dramatically outnumbered the physical gold backing them. And when that gap becomes too wide, when too many people try to convert their paper claims into actual metal at the same time, the system experiences what can only be described as a violent repricing. The paper price and the physical price snap violently back together, and the direction that snapping happens is always up, because there is never more physical gold than people think, and always more paper claims than anyone admits. I want to tell you about something that happened at the London Bullion Market Association, the LBMA, which is essentially the wholesale gold market that operates behind the scenes of everything you see at retail level. The LBMA operates on what's called an unallocated system, meaning that when most institutional investors own gold through the LBMA, they don't own specific gold bars with serial numbers. They own a claim against a pool of gold, with many other claimants sharing that same pool. The ratio of claims to actual metal has historically been estimated at somewhere between 50 to 1 and 100 to 1. That means for every 1 ounce of physical gold sitting in an LBMA vault, there may be 50, 75, or even 100 ounces of paper claims against it. In 1933, the problem was that Americans were hoarding physical gold outside the system, starving the banking sector of liquidity. Today, the problem runs in the exact opposite direction. There are mountains of paper claims on gold, with very little physical metal actually backing them. When confidence in that system cracks, and systems based on leveraged trust always eventually crack, the scramble for real physical metal will be unlike anything we have seen in the modern era. Now, here's where we come full circle to 1933. And here's the part that I think is genuinely urgent for anyone watching this who has significant retirement savings. When a government faces an unmanageable debt burden and a collapsing monetary architecture, it has a limited number of options. It can raise taxes, deeply unpopular and economically damaging. It can cut spending, politically almost impossible. It can allow inflation to run hot, silently eroding the purchasing power of the debt. This is already happening. Or it can do what Roosevelt did. It can find a way to capture the value of gold, to harness the monetary power of the metal to reset the balance sheet. How might that happen today? I want to be careful here, because I'm not predicting with certainty that what happened in 1933 will happen again in exactly the same form. Outright confiscation is politically much harder in the modern era. Americans are more informed. The internet exists. The backlash would be enormous. But there are other mechanisms that achieve similar results, some subtle, some not so subtle. One scenario that monetary historians have discussed is a gold revaluation. The United States government technically values its gold reserves on its books at a price set decades ago, a number that bears almost no relationship to the current market price of the metal. If the government were to officially revalue its gold holdings to current market prices, it would create an enormous accounting gain that could be used to address a portion of the debt burden. This is essentially what Roosevelt did in 1934. He created a windfall by revaluing gold higher after acquiring it cheaply. The difference is, today, they wouldn't need to confiscate your gold first. The revaluation itself would be the mechanism. And if that revaluation triggered a massive institutional scramble for physical gold, if it caused the paper markets to collapse toward physical reality, the winners would be those who already own physical metal, and the losers would be those holding paper promises, paper currencies, and paper-based retirement accounts. Another scenario involves capital controls. Governments facing currency crises historically restrict the flow of capital. They limit how much gold you can buy, or impose special taxes on gold investments, or make it difficult to take gold offshore. We've seen versions of this in Greece, in Cyprus, in Argentina, in Venezuela. The specific playbook varies, the instinct driving it never changes. And this is exactly why what central banks are doing matters so profoundly. They are not buying gold because they think it's a nice store of value. They are buying gold because they are preparing for a world where the monetary rules get rewritten. They are positioning themselves to have maximum leverage when the reset comes, and they have been doing this quietly, consistently, at record pace, while most ordinary Americans sit in traditional retirement accounts that have zero allocation to the one asset that has protected wealth through every monetary crisis in recorded human history. Think about the timeline of monetary crises and gold's response. When Nixon shocked the world in 1971 by ending the dollar's convertibility to gold, essentially defaulting on the Bretton Woods promise, gold began a decade-long surge that culminated in an extraordinary spike in 1980. The investors who understood what was happening in advance, who positioned themselves before the crisis became obvious to everyone, saw their wealth not just protected, but dramatically multiplied. The investors who waited until it was front-page news, until every television commentator was talking about the gold price, they bought near the top and suffered through the subsequent correction. The same pattern played out in 2008 and 2011. In the aftermath of the financial crisis, gold surged as the Federal Reserve launched unprecedented quantitative easing programs. The early movers, the institutional investors, the family offices, the people who understood what massive money printing does to the relative value of hard assets, they were already positioned. By the time the mainstream narrative caught up to the gold story, the easy money had already been made. And right now, we are watching the largest sovereign wealth accumulation of gold in modern history happening in real time, orchestrated by central banks that have access to the best research, the best economists, and the most sensitive intelligence on the future direction of the global monetary system. They are buying with a conviction and a pace that is telling us something. The question is whether you are listening. Now, I want to step back for a moment and speak directly to you, particularly if you've worked your entire life to build meaningful retirement savings, if you've done everything right, contributed to your 401k, managed your IRA, built the kind of financial foundation that was supposed to give you security in your later years, because I think there is something you need to hear. The retirement system in this country was built during an era of dollar dominance, of stable institutional trust, of financial predictability that I believe we are moving away from. The traditional model, put your savings in a diversified mix of stocks and bonds, trust the system, ride out the volatility, that model was designed for a world that is changing underneath our feet in ways that have no modern precedent. Gold has been used as a store of value for over 5,000 years. 5,000 years. It has outlasted every empire, every currency, every financial system that has ever tried to render it irrelevant. And right now, the smart money, the central banks, the sovereign wealth funds, the billionaires who quietly never went fully paper, they are accumulating it at the fastest pace on record. They're not selling. They're not reducing their exposure. They are buying with both hands, while simultaneously managing a public narrative that keeps ordinary investors sitting in traditional paper assets. I want to mention something for those of you who have at least $100,000 in a retirement account, and you've been thinking about what you can do to add a layer of real protection to what you've built. One option that many Americans don't know is available to them is a gold IRA, a self-directed retirement account that allows you to hold physical precious metals inside a tax-advantaged retirement structure. You get the IRS-approved tax treatment of a traditional retirement account, combined with exposure to physical gold, the one asset that has historically moved inversely to exactly the kind of monetary stress we've been discussing. I've put together a free guide on how this works. It's linked in the description, and it covers the mechanics clearly without pushing you toward any particular decision. Just good information, because the more you know, the better positioned you are to protect what you've worked so hard to build. Now, let me pull all of this together, because I want to make sure you walk away from this video with a clear picture of what I believe is actually unfolding. The 1933 parallel isn't just about gold confiscation. It's about what precedes gold confiscation, or any form of monetary restructuring. It's about the conditions that force a government to reach for extraordinary measures. And those conditions are unsustainable debt, a currency under existential pressure, a global monetary order in transition, and a population largely unprepared for what's coming. Every single one of those conditions is present today. The debt is at levels that are mathematically difficult to service through normal means. The dollar's reserve currency status is being actively challenged by a coalition of nations representing a substantial portion of global GDP. The gold market is showing signs of stress between the paper price and physical reality, and the vast majority of American retirement savers have no meaningful exposure to the one asset that protects purchasing power when monetary systems reprice. The physical gold market is tightening. The COMEX registered inventory trends are flashing warning signals for those who know how to read them. Central banks are not buying because they think gold is a quaint relic. They are buying because they understand that in a world where every major currency is a fiat currency backed by nothing but confidence and government decree, physical gold is the only truly neutral reserve asset, the only money that no government can print more of. When the paper markets crack, when the disconnect between electronic gold claims and actual physical metal becomes impossible to sustain, the repricing will be sudden and severe, not a gradual drift higher over months, a violent, dislocating surge that catches the unprepared completely flat-footed, the same way August 1971 caught an entire generation unprepared, the same way 2008 shocked investors who thought diversification into stocks and bonds was sufficient protection. The 1933 story is ultimately a story about who holds the real thing when the system resets. Roosevelt confiscated gold precisely because it had value that paper could not replicate. He needed to control it because it was the one asset that could anchor a new monetary order. In today's version of that story, the central banks are positioning themselves to hold the real thing. And the question every ordinary investor, every retiree, every person with meaningful savings needs to answer for themselves is, which side of that equation do you want to be on? Gold's message right now is not subtle. When you see a metal surge to all-time highs against a backdrop of the world's reserve currency, when you see central banks buying at the fastest pace in modern history, when you see the paper market for gold showing signs of structural stress, when you see BRICS nations explicitly trying to build a gold-anchored alternative to the current dollar system, when you see all of that happening simultaneously, that is not noise, that is signal. And the signal is telling you that gold understands something about what is coming that the mainstream financial media has not yet admitted. I started this video by asking you to hold the story of 1933 in your mind. I want to close by bringing that story full circle. The people who suffered most in 1933 were not the wealthy elite. The Rockefellers and the Morgans had lawyers and accountants who found every exemption in the fine print. The people who were truly hurt were ordinary citizens, working people, retirees, small business owners, who had done the right thing, who had saved their money in gold precisely because they didn't trust the banking system that was collapsing around them. And the government took it anyway, took it at a price they set, and then immediately enriched itself by revaluing that gold higher. History does not repeat itself on a precise schedule, but it rhymes with a regularity that should command your attention. The conditions that produced 1933 are reassembling themselves in slow motion, in the background, behind the daily noise of market headlines and political theater. The entities that understand this, the central banks, the sovereign wealth funds, the quietly accumulating institutions, they are not waiting for certainty. They are acting on probability. They are positioning for a world where gold's role in the monetary system is dramatically larger than the current paper price reflects. And for those of you who have stayed with me to the very end of this video, I want to offer you something specific. If you have a retirement account with at least $100,000 in it, and you've been thinking seriously about the ideas we've discussed today, I'm offering a free one-on-one educational consultation. No obligation, no sales pitch, just a private conversation with someone who can walk you through exactly how physical gold fits into a retirement protection strategy. This is available exclusively to American retirees who qualify. All you have to do is mention that you watched this video when you reach out through the link in the description. That's it. Free, private, educational, no strings attached. Because the window for positioning ahead of the reset does not stay open indefinitely. 90 years ago, the government told Americans they had less than 4 weeks to hand over their gold or face prison. The people who understood what was coming had already made their moves long before that order was signed. The question is not whether you understand what's happening. You do. You've just watched this entire video. The question is whether you're going to do something about it while you still can.